She stood in the spotlight, her designer dress clinging to her perfect figure, the flash of cameras capturing every angle of her triumphant return. But no one was looking at the outfit. All eyes were fixed on the small baby bump she proudly cradled, the curve of scandal hiding beneath a silk gown. The moment was choreographed with the precision of a reality show finale, yet more devastating than fiction, because across the room stood her ex, the self-made millionaire everyone adored, now married to a woman hailed as the most graceful lady in high society. The glittering ballroom was frozen, champagne flutes suspended mid-air, breath caught in the throats of socialites and business moguls alike. "Do you recognize me? Or just the baby I'm carrying?" she asked, her voice calm, almost amused, but sharp enough to slice open old wounds. His jaw clenched. His new wife remained expressionless, her smile calm and unreadable, like a queen who'd seen 1,000 storms before this one. The silence that followed was deafening. No one had prepared for this. Not the press, not the security, not even the millionaire himself. Yet his wife's eyes didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply turned, handed her clutch to a server, and stepped forward with grace that threatened to outshine the chaos. The cameras zoomed in. Was this going to be a catfight? A dramatic public meltdown? A betrayal caught in real time? Instead, what unfolded was stranger, colder, and more calculated than anyone could have guessed. She placed a hand on her husband's chest and whispered, "Let her speak. Let the world hear what she came to say." The ex, momentarily thrown off by this unexpected permission, blinked, but then quickly recovered. "This baby is his," she said, her voice louder now, feeding off the crowd's curiosity. "And I won't be silenced anymore." Her eyes shone, not with maternal love but with victory. Headlines would be written tonight, scandals would trend, followers would multiply. But while the world expected fury, betrayal, tears, what they got instead was a slow-burning smirk from the wife, followed by 6 haunting words. "You think that's the only surprise?" A collective gasp rippled across the gala. This wasn't just drama. It was a war unfolding in gowns and secrets. The millionaire stood frozen, caught between 2 women, 2 timelines, and 1 unborn child that threatened to rewrite his carefully built legacy. But deep inside, beneath the suit and the media mask, panic crept in. Could it be his? Had a mistake from his past returned to haunt his present? Or worse, was this all orchestrated? He looked into his wife's eyes, searching for hurt, betrayal, or doubt. But there was only confidence, a strange, unsettling confidence that suggested she was 10 steps ahead of everything. The ex clutched her stomach and looked victorious, yet for some reason, nervous. Because despite her grand entrance, something about the wife's silence was terrifying. It wasn't defensive, it was strategic, like a player who already knew how the game ended. Murmurs spread, phones buzzed, news sites began uploading live headlines. "Millionaire caught in love triangle scandal. Ex-girlfriend claims baby belongs to newlywed billionaire." But none of them knew that the real story was just beginning. Because as the guests whispered and speculated, the wife turned to the press, adjusted her earrings, and said, "If you think this night is about a baby, you're mistaken. Tonight is about truth." And with that, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. The room tilted. What did she know? Was this a setup? A counterattack? She handed it to her husband, who hesitated before opening it. His eyes scanned the contents, pupils dilating with every word. Shock, guilt, fear, regret, then relief? He closed the folder and looked at his wife, not with anger, but awe. What had she done? What had she known? And why did she let him walk into this trap, only to disarm it like a queen on a chessboard? The ex looked rattled now. Her script wasn't going according to plan. Her hands trembled slightly. "Why aren't you saying anything?" she asked, eyes flicking between them. "Why aren't you denying it?" But the wife simply stepped forward, looked the ex dead in the eyes, and whispered so only she could hear, "Because you brought a secret. But I brought the truth." And just like that, the tables flipped. The ex might have been pregnant, but the wife? She was pregnant with something far more powerful. Knowledge, timing, and a surprise so profound it would leave the entire world gasping. The cameras continued to click. The gossip escalated. But the emotional hook was set. A man caught between the sins of his past and the strength of his present. An ex clinging to a pregnancy that may or may not be her leverage, and a wife holding a secret that would soon eclipse everything. And so the world watched, not knowing that the real question wasn't whose baby is it, but rather, what is the bigger surprise the wife is about to reveal? Before there were designer galas, before the world knew his name, before private jets and glowing headlines, he was just a man with dirt under his nails and dreams too big for his zip code. He worked 3 jobs, janitor by dawn, dishwasher by day, and coding in a rented internet cafe by night, chasing a vision only he could see. Back then, he lived in a shoebox apartment that always smelled faintly of mildew and ramen noodles, and the only suit he owned was from a thrift shop, 2 sizes too big, with one loose button he kept fixing with dental floss. And beside him, through those gritty years, stood her, his first love, the ex who once whispered promises of forever between bills and broken appliances. They met in college, both hungry in their way. He, for success. She, for status. At first they laughed about their struggles, made love on a mattress placed directly on the floor, and survived on coffee, ambition, and the illusion that love could outlast poverty. But slowly, cracks began to show. She wanted dinners at places with menus that didn't show prices. She wanted silk robes, not his baggy hoodies. Her compliments turned into criticisms. "You'll always be dreaming, but never living," she once snapped when he spent their last $50 on a software license instead of taking her out. He didn't defend himself. He couldn't. Not when her eyes were already wandering toward the boys in finance, the ones with leased BMWs and Rolexes they hadn't earned. She stopped introducing him as her boyfriend and started calling him a guy I used to date. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday, when he came home soaked, exhausted, and hopeful, because he had finally pitched his startup idea to a firm that didn't laugh him out of the room. But instead of celebrating, he found a note. "I can't wait forever for a man who's always almost something." No goodbye. No forwarding address. Just silence where love used to be. He broke that night. He let the rain wash over him as he sat on the cracked pavement outside their apartment, clutching the note in one hand and a business plan in the other. It would have been poetic if it weren't so cruel. The world didn't notice him breaking. The world doesn't clap for the struggling. But from that moment, he stopped chasing love and started chasing legacy. He worked harder, smarter. He lived in his office, slept on a beanbag, showered at the gym, and treated rejection like fuel. And somewhere between failure and obsession, he cracked the code. Literally. His app went viral. Then a company offered to buy it. Then another. By the time he was 30, he wasn't just wealthy. He was unstoppable. But even as the world labeled him a genius, a disruptor, a self-made millionaire, he never forgot the woman who left. He didn't hate her. He just remembered. Every word, every insult, every moment he wasn't good enough. And so he built, not just an empire, but a wall around his heart. Love became a risk he no longer calculated. Until he met her, the woman who would become his wife. She didn't fall for the money, the flash, or the name. She saw the man underneath, the exhausted warrior behind the tailored suits. She was kind where his ex was cold, supportive where the past had been critical. She didn't need rescuing. She didn't need luxury. She simply needed the truth. And for once, he gave it. Every dark corner, every broken piece. She embraced it all. Their love grew not from desperation, but from healing. And he believed, foolishly or bravely, that maybe he had outrun his past. That maybe heartbreak was a closed chapter. Until tonight. Until that room. Until the woman who once said he was never enough showed up flaunting the one thing that could crack any man's armor. A child. The timing was surgical. The dress, intentional. The expression? A cocktail of triumph and entitlement. But what she didn't know, what no one in the room knew, was what came after she left. What he became, because she left. This wasn't just a love triangle. This was a reckoning. Because behind every fortune is a wound that started it all. And hers was the hand that lit the match. And as she stood there, stomach slightly rounded, eyes scanning the crowd for reaction, she still thought she had the upper hand. She thought he'd stammer, that his wife would crumble, that the media would crucify them. But she didn't know about the nights he stayed awake, reliving her exit like a ghost on repeat. She didn't know about the therapy, the isolation, the way he kept her notes in a drawer. Not as a keepsake, but as a warning. And most of all, she didn't know who his wife was. The woman who saw that pain and chose to stay, not run. So yes, the ex was back. Pregnant. And dramatic. But she was playing chess with a queen who already had the board memorized. And the man she thought she still had power over? He wasn't that broke boy anymore. He was the storm that rose after she walked away. And tonight, he wouldn't be the one trembling. She would. The world had always divided people not just by wealth but by how they acquired it. Some wore their money like armor, while others wore their values like a crown. And now, in the mansion where chandeliers glittered above heads filled with secrets, the difference between a gold digger and a genuine heart stood center stage. One woman, wrapped in designer drama, had returned with a swollen belly and a smirk that screamed, "I came back to claim what's mine." The other stood beside the millionaire, not trembling, not stepping back, but holding her ground like a woman who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. The room's temperature shifted as eyes bounced between them. Judgments forming, alliances shifting, truths bubbling beneath society's polished surface. The ex's voice dripped with rehearsed vulnerability, painting herself as the victim who never stopped loving, who had no choice but to leave when times were tough, who had returned only out of necessity for the child's sake. But beneath that glossy pity act was the hunger of someone who never loved the man, only what he could become. She had once calculated his worth through dollar signs, and now, seeing the empire he'd built, she thought her gamble had paid off. Her expensive perfume couldn't mask the entitlement in her tone, nor could her crocodile tears hide the sharp edge in her smile when she looked at his wife, the real one, the one who had touched his soul, not his wallet. She expected to be welcomed back like a queen returning from exile. But what she didn't expect was that the throne was already occupied by a woman who never asked for it but earned it. His wife didn't flinch. She didn't snap. She simply stepped forward, calm and steady, her presence louder than any scream. And that's when the room realized the real class wasn't in heels, handbags, or headlines. It was in how you stood in storms you didn't create. The ex moved like a social climber used to charming her way through obstacles. But the wife had no such illusions. She didn't need to prove herself. She was herself. The clash wasn't just between two women. It was between two worlds. One forged in manipulation, the other in sincerity. The ex tried to play the victim, saying, "I left because he had nothing, and I had to survive. I didn't know he'd become this." But her words betrayed her. Because she hadn't left to survive. She had left to upgrade. And now that he was the upgrade, she thought her old key still fit the new lock. She kept talking, spinning half-truths into sympathy, trying to tug on his heart with memories from a life she once rejected. "Remember when we used to dream together?" she said. But dreams weren't enough for her back then. Only dollar signs mattered. Only appearances. Only men who had already made it, not those still struggling to. And now she was back. Not because she loved the man, but because she loved the lifestyle. What she didn't realize was that the man she left behind was gone. The man before her now, the billionaire in the tailored charcoal suit, the calm face behind cold eyes, had learned the difference between attraction and loyalty, between chemistry and character. His wife had seen him cry. She had wiped the sweat from his brow after 20-hour days. She had held him when deals collapsed and praised him when no one else believed. She had watched him bleed and still called him a king. This wasn't just about a baby. This was about worth. About who really stood beside him when there was nothing to offer but a broken dream and tired hands. His wife didn't need a DNA test to know what was happening here. She didn't need to shout or expose the ex for who she was, because the truth was already obvious. One woman came back with a story. The other had lived the truth. One woman wore makeup to mask intentions. The other wore strength like a second skin. And him? The man caught between the past and the present? He watched silently, but inside, a storm brewed. Because he knew what the ex was doing. Her return was perfectly timed. She'd heard about the IPO. She'd seen the headlines. She thought being pregnant made her invincible. But what she didn't know was that he had seen through her the moment she stepped in. He wasn't the broken man she once left behind. He was a billionaire now, but not just in money, in awareness, in discernment, and in love. And when she tried to use the baby as a bond, to claim her place by dangling a child between them, he didn't bite. Because he had learned real family isn't made by blood alone. It's made by choice, by sacrifice, by truth. And beside him stood a woman who had chosen him every single day, even when he had nothing to give back. So the class conflict wasn't about money. It never was. It was about substance. About which woman would still be standing if all the wealth disappeared tomorrow. And in that silent, tension-filled moment, his hand moved, not toward the past, but toward the woman who never asked for anything and gave everything. The room gasped. The ex's lips tightened. And the wife? She simply smiled because she didn't need to win him. He had already chosen her long ago. And nothing, not a baby, not an ex, not a scandal, could change that now. It all started with a single flash. A paparazzi camera catching the ex standing outside the mansion gates, cradling her baby bump like a prop in a drama she was about to unleash upon the world. One photo, one smirk, one headline that changed everything. Billionaire's pregnant ex returns. Baby scandal rocks high society. Within hours, it was everywhere. Gossip blogs, morning shows, Twitter threads dissecting her makeup, her dress, her audacity, and with every passing minute, the narrative spun further out of control. The public didn't care about facts. They wanted fire, betrayal, and drama served with a silver spoon. "Is the baby his?" they asked. "Did he cheat on his new wife? Was the marriage a cover-up all along?" Speculation exploded like wildfire. Every photo of him with his wife was now scrutinized under a lens of suspicion. Every smile seemed fake. Every silence screamed guilt. Reporters camped outside the office. Drones hovered over the estate. And yet, amidst the chaos, the one person who didn't say a word was him. Because silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. He wasn't going to be baited into a public war when he knew exactly what this was. A performance. A gold digger's masterpiece. But his wife? She was the one caught in the crossfire of whispers and stares, of clients questioning her place, of friends exchanging pitying glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Even her own parents called, voices trembling with confusion. Is it true? And the pain she felt wasn't from the doubt. It was from knowing they even had to ask. But she didn't crumble. She didn't cry for cameras or post cryptic messages. She stood tall. She went to work. She smiled in boardrooms like nothing had changed, even though everything had. Because she knew storms don't break you when you've already been through fire. And she had earned her seat beside him, not through scandal, but through sacrifice. Still, the noise outside was deafening. The ex ? She leaned into it. She gave interviews cloaked in crocodile tears, claiming she didn't want attention, only a father for my child. But her words dripped with passive-aggressive venom. I never wanted to ruin anyone's marriage, but he deserves to know the truth. And the public ate it up. Sympathy poured in. Strangers sent her gifts. Her followers quadrupled. She went viral for all the wrong reasons, and she loved it. Her plan wasn't just to stir drama, it was to break the one thing she couldn't buy: their love. But what she didn't understand was that love, when real, doesn't shatter under pressure. It crystallizes. Still, pressure makes people question, and in the quiet moments, even the strongest hearts wonder. She turned to him one night, eyes searching, voice low. "Did anything happen between you two? After us?" And his answer wasn't a denial, it was a promise. "You know the man I was, but more importantly, you know the man I am. And I don't need to defend myself when the truth always finds a way." But even as he held her hand, he couldn't ignore the mess unfolding outside. Shareholders were panicking, deals were paused, headlines screamed louder than reason. And the worst part? The ex wasn't done. She released a video. Tears, ultrasounds, old photos of them together, captioned with heartbreaking music. And in the middle of it all, an alleged text screenshot. "I still think about you, sometimes." Whether it was real or fake didn't matter. The internet believed it. And suddenly, his silence was seen as guilt. And his wife? She became the villain. She stole him. She's the rebound. She's barren, and now he finally has a child. The cruelty was endless, and still, she stood firm. Until one morning, while pouring coffee with trembling hands, she whispered, "Is it worth it? Loving someone who the world is so determined to ruin?" And that broke him. Not because he doubted her, but because the war they were fighting wasn't against the ex. It was against perception, against the hunger for chaos, against a world that values scandal over truth. But he wasn't going to let it win. So he did what billionaires rarely do. He stepped into the storm, not as a tycoon, but as a man. He held a press conference. No PR spin, no rehearsed lines. Just him. Raw, real, human. He looked into the cameras and said, "Yes, we had a past. But that's where she stayed. In the past. The only woman who has ever stood by me, even when I had nothing, is my wife. And if this child is mine, I will take full responsibility. But I will not allow anyone to manipulate love into leverage." And with that, the world paused. Because truth, when spoken plainly,
hits harder than drama ever could. But just as the noise began to settle, the ex played her final card. A paternity test leaked to the press. The result? Pending. Which meant one thing: this wasn't over. And in the shadows, she smiled. Because going viral wasn't about truth. It was about attention. And as long as the cameras stayed on her, she was winning, or so she thought. The moment the paternity test result was marked pending, the ex thought she had won. But what she failed to understand was that a real queen doesn't react. She rises, and the wife had been silent long enough. For weeks, she'd held her tongue while the world painted her as the second choice, the rebound, the infertile woman clinging to a man who might have fathered another woman's child. But now, it wasn't just about protecting her marriage, it was about reclaiming her name. And so, the wife stepped into the arena, not with vengeance, but with undeniable poise. She launched a charity initiative in her name, centered around supporting single mothers and abandoned women, turning the scandal into a platform of power. The press tried to twist it, calling it damage control, but when they interviewed the women she helped and heard their real stories, the tone shifted. She wasn't just reacting, she was rewriting the narrative. And the billionaire? He watched her with awe, realizing that in a world obsessed with appearances, she was choosing substance over spectacle. But the ex wouldn't back down. She booked a spot on a national talk show, baby bump proudly on display, crocodile tears flowing as she described how he abandoned me after I told him the truth. And the audience gasped, believing every rehearsed word. But what she didn't expect was that the wife had receipts. A silent war began, not with insults, but with facts. The wife released a statement backed by legal documents, revealing that the ex had never told him she was pregnant until the press found out, that she had cut contact years ago and only returned after news of their engagement went public. Suddenly, the media tide began to turn. Influencers switched sides. Public opinion wavered. And through it all, the wife never stooped to the ex's level. She let her actions speak. At the next charity gala, she wore the same designer gown the ex had tried to wear on that talk show. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. She was telling the world, I see you, I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not going anywhere. The billionaire walked beside her that night, not as her shield, but as her equal, because for the first time in this whole saga, it wasn't about who had the upper hand, it was about who had the unshakable heart. Meanwhile, the ex tried again. She, accidentally, leaked a sonogram image with his name scribbled in the corner. Social media exploded. Baby billionaire trended for 48 hours straight. But this time, the wife didn't flinch. She met with the ex privately, without cameras, without lawyers, just two women face to face. And what she said shook the ex to her core. You can't force someone to come back to a past they've outgrown. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to remind you that your pain won't heal by breaking someone else's peace. That moment shifted something. For a second, the ex faltered, because beneath all the makeup and media games, she was still a woman who had lost a man she once thought she owned. But even that didn't stop her. She began threatening legal action, demanding child support, interviews, and validation. And still, the wife stood firm, because the strongest revenge is not destruction, it's elevation. She was now receiving invitations to international conferences. Her charity was nominated for awards. Her story became a symbol for women who chose dignity in the face of drama. And as the media finally began to separate truth from noise, the billionaire made a decision that would shift everything. He offered to take a private paternity test, this time on his terms. The results? Negative. The baby wasn't his. The silence that followed was deafening. News outlets pulled their stories. Talk show hosts backtracked. Influencers deleted their sympathy posts for the ex. And she vanished. Her 15 minutes of fame evaporated faster than they arrived. But the wife didn't celebrate with cruelty. She didn't post a "told you so." She went back to work. Back to impact. Back to love. Because her power didn't come from proving anyone wrong. It came from knowing she was always right about who she was. And the billionaire, watching her navigate it all with grace and strength, knew one thing for certain. He hadn't just married a woman. He had married a force of nature. A woman who didn't compete with insecurity because she stood on a foundation no scandal could shake. In private, he held her close and whispered, "They tried to break you, but all they did was show the world why you're mine." And in that moment, she smiled, not because she won, but because she never needed to fight in the first place. Real power doesn't scream. It simply endures.
It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, a fundraiser gala celebrating the expansion of her foundation into 3 more cities, a night meant to highlight healing and hope. But instead, it became a battlefield draped in satin and sequins when the ex crashed the event with a microphone and a mission. No one saw her coming, not even the security team that had been briefed about potential threats, because she walked in like she belonged there, dressed to kill, baby bump on display, and a camera crew subtly trailing her steps. The room fell silent as she marched toward the stage, and before anyone could stop her, she grabbed the mic during the opening remarks, her voice trembling with rehearsed rage. "You all celebrate her as a saint," she shouted, "but she tried to erase my child's future." Gasps erupted. Cameras turned, phones were raised, and there she stood, playing victim to perfection as she accused the billionaire and his wife of offering her hush money to disappear, of denying a child a father, of building a charitable empire on the backs of other women's pain. The press had a field day. Social media went feral. And the wife? She froze for only a moment, but that moment felt like eternity. She had spent months rising above, choosing grace, building bridges while others lit fires. But this was no longer just a media circus. It was war. Before anyone else could react, she stepped forward, took the second mic, and addressed the crowd. Not with anger, but with precision. "This woman is right about one thing," she began, her voice steady. "There is a child involved, and that's why I stayed silent. But silence should never be mistaken for guilt." Then she turned toward the ex, face calm, voice cold. "You came here to humiliate me. You leaked stories. You manipulated sympathy. But you never once thought of the child you claimed to protect." The ex fired back with tears and accusations, waving fake legal letters and voicemails cut out of context. But the wife had come prepared. Screens lit up around the room as her team played the full recordings, unedited, uncropped, undeniable. Every lie is unraveling in real time. The ex's voice admitted the pregnancy wasn't confirmed. A message to a friend bragging about milking this drama to get back in the billionaire's life. Suddenly, the room shifted. Sympathy turned to suspicion. The applause the ex expected never came. Even her camera crew started backing away. But she wasn't done. In a final act of desperation, she screamed, "He's the father! You're just scared to lose him!" That's when the billionaire himself stood up from the VIP section and walked to the stage. Not with fury, but with finality. "Enough," he said, eyes locked on her. "I have protected your dignity longer than you ever protected mine. The test was negative. You knew that. Yet you chose this." He turned to the crowd, placing a gentle hand on his wife's back. "This woman," he said, pointing to his wife, "stood beside me when I had nothing. She believed in me when no one else did. And she never once asked for proof, or power, or pity. She simply loved me." The audience erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. The truth had finally spoken. And the ex? She stood paralyzed, mascara streaking, the crowd parting around her like a wave as security escorted her out. Not forcefully, but with the kind of dignity she had never shown to others. Backstage, the wife collapsed into her husband's arms, not out of weakness, but from the sheer emotional toll of fighting battles she never picked. He whispered, "I'm so sorry you had to carry this alone." And she smiled through tears, replying, "I carried it because I knew the truth would eventually walk into the light." That confrontation made headlines for days, dissected by tabloids, influencers, and talk shows alike. But the narrative had finally flipped. The wife wasn't the villain in a love triangle. She was the hero in a war of character. And while the ex faded into obscurity, trying to spin her version of the tale, the world had already chosen its champion. The foundation received more donations than ever. The couple's love story became a symbol of loyalty and strength. And when asked later in an interview how she kept her composure, the wife simply said, "When you've been through the fire and didn't burn, someone else's smoke can't touch you." But even with victory in her hands, she never gloated. Instead, she doubled down on her mission, using her platform to speak about emotional abuse, manipulation, and the importance of choosing dignity over drama. The confrontation may have been public, but the transformation was personal. She had become something the ex never anticipated, a movement. And the billionaire? He watched her with pride, not just because she survived, but because she rose, unshaken, unbothered, unforgettable. The applause had barely faded when the next wave hit, and this time it didn't come from a camera-hungry ex or a viral video. It came from him, the man she stood beside, the man she defended when the world called him cold, the man who once looked at her like she was his entire future. And now, for the first time, looked at her like she was a question he couldn't answer. It started with a single envelope, left on his office desk in the middle of the night, unmarked, anonymous, and containing a copy of a DNA test. One line, one percentage, and a gut-punching possibility that the child might be his. It didn't make sense, They had done a test before. Negative, final, closed. But this new document painted a different picture. Akilans venyolk eges negi tz sa zalikos match. Paternal relationship, positive. It was either real or someone was playing a twisted game. And the worst part? He doubted her. He didn't tell her right away. He started watching her instead, silently, trying to read guilt in her eyes, confusion in her smile. And she? She felt the shift immediately. He was distant, quieter, no longer reaching for her hand at night, no longer asking her how she slept. The foundation meetings turned cold. Their kitchen became a battlefield of silent glances. And then came the breaking point. She found the envelope, hidden in his drawer. Her hands shook as she held it. Not because of the contents, but because of the betrayal. He hadn't even asked. He hadn't even told her. He had just doubted. When she confronted him, her voice cracked. "You think I could lie to you about something like this?" And he, unable to meet her eyes, replied, "I don't know what to think anymore." That sentence shattered her. After everything, after standing by him through the ex's madness, the public slander, the fundraising gala sabotage, after every storm she had weathered to protect his name, his company, his heart, he still looked at her like she was capable of deceit. And in that moment, she realized something painful. The test wasn't the problem. The real damage was his hesitation to believe her. That night, she didn't sleep in their bed. She didn't sleep at all. She sat on the balcony with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the city lights blur through her tears. The woman who once carried his empire with her strength now sat drowning in questions she never asked for. And as the morning sun crept over the skyline, she made a decision. She would find the truth herself. Not to prove anything to him, but to reclaim her peace. She called in a private lab, demanded a new test from the source, and tracked down every possible angle of manipulation. And what she discovered blew the floor out from under both of them. The ex had doctored the test. The real results were still negative. The 98.4% match? It came from a relative of his, someone the ex paid to submit a sample. It was a con. A sick, strategic move meant to fracture what was strongest between them: trust. When she handed him the full report, color-coded, notarized, undeniable, she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than anything she'd ever screamed. And for the first time in their entire relationship, he saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of the media or the ex, but fear that he had stopped being her safe place. "I didn't want to believe it," he whispered, broken. "But the possibility, it shook me." She shook her head. "No. What shook you was the idea that I could be a liar. That's what hurts." He fell to his knees, right there in their living room. Not because he was weak, but because he realized how close he came to losing a woman who had never once made him doubt himself, even when he had nothing. And her? She didn't cry. She had done enough of that. Instead, she said, "If love doesn't believe you when the world is screaming lies, then what kind of love is that?" That moment, that raw, ugly truth, it was their rock bottom. And yet, beneath the rubble of assumptions and silence and pain, something unexpected bloomed. The beginning of healing. Because he finally understood that being strong together wasn't about facing enemies, it was about standing firm in the truth of each other. And she finally voiced the ache she had buried for too long. The next day, he stood in front of the entire boardroom and publicly apologized. Not just to her, but to every woman who's ever been doubted for telling the truth. He donated millions to DNA fraud victim charities. He launched an initiative to protect families from forged evidence in custody battles. And behind the scenes, he worked day and night to earn back her trust, not with words, but with actions. But the scars remained. She still flinched when he hesitated. He still saw pain when she smiled. It would take time, maybe forever. But one thing was now certain. The truth had burned everything false to the ground. And from that wreckage, something honest could finally grow. That rock bottom, that DNA test, that split second of doubt, it became the blueprint for a love that would either rebuild stronger than ever or crumble once and for all. It was a moment that would change everything. A moment he had no idea was even coming. Everything had calmed down, or so he thought. They had made it through the accusations, the trust issues, the public fallout. But as he sat in his office, reviewing documents and emails from his team, something caught his eye. Something so small, so hidden, that it might have been overlooked by anyone else. A piece of paper, wedged between two contracts, seemed innocuous at first. But then he noticed the seal. Something he'd seen before. Something familiar. It was the letterhead of a prenup. His heart sank before he even opened it. The last time he'd seen something like this, it was during their wedding, when he had laughed it off. After all, she had seemed so different then. So confident. So genuine. He had signed it without a second thought. The prenup was a legal formality. But now he realized something far more sinister had been tucked inside that seemingly harmless document. A loyalty clause. The clause wasn't just about financial protection. It was a legal safeguard for emotional loyalty. Something that, in hindsight, felt almost too calculated. The loyalty clause was simple. If at any point she stepped outside their marriage emotionally, without his knowledge, the agreement would nullify, and she would forfeit everything. Everything. The inheritance, the shares in his company, and all the rights she had as his wife. But what made it worse wasn't just the clause. It was how it was written. The language was sharp, meticulous, like someone who had carefully planned for a scenario exactly like the one they were in. He blinked, reading the fine print, his hands trembling. His mind raced back to the fights, the nights she'd been distant, the moments where he'd felt like she was pulling away. What if she had been just waiting for a reason to invoke this clause? What if she had already been preparing herself to leave? To betray him emotionally, maybe even physically, and use the clause as a way to take him down? No, he thought to himself. She wouldn't. She couldn't. But the truth gnawed at him, pulling him back to that same question. Was it possible that the entire time she had been working behind the scenes to protect herself from the very relationship that was supposed to protect both of them? Loyalty, as defined by the clause, wasn't just about fidelity. It was about emotional devotion. The fine print didn't care about love or trust. It cared about whether or not she would stay completely committed to him in every way. And now, he began to wonder if the test of love had been the accusations from the ex, or if it had been her quiet test. Had she been waiting for him to fail so she could find a way to leave? His stomach churned. He couldn't breathe. He stared at the document, feeling his entire world shift under him. In that moment, he understood something critical. This wasn't just about them anymore. This wasn't about the baby drama or his ex coming back into the picture. This was about his belief in their love, a belief that had been carefully constructed around loyalty, trust, and understanding. But the loyalty clause, it had the power to tear all of it apart. The moment he realized the full weight of that clause, he found himself sitting in a cold sweat, wondering if he had been a fool all this time. What was this love he had been working so hard to build? Was it real? Or had it always been based on a legal agreement? Was this just a game to her? Or was she too playing by the same rules that everyone else in his life seemed to follow? Rules that had nothing to do with true emotions, but with control? Control of love, control of loyalty, control of their future. His gut twisted. He needed to confront her. He had to know. But there was one thing stopping him. He was terrified of the answer. He wasn't scared that she might admit to betraying him emotionally. That wasn't his fear. He feared that she might tell him she had been prepared to leave all along, ready to invoke that clause to start fresh, without him. If that was the case, everything he had ever believed in, everything he had ever trusted, would fall apart. He took a deep breath and forced himself to think. He needed to be sure. He couldn't confront her with accusations unless he had proof. So he decided to start watching. Not in a controlling way, but in a way that could help him understand if the woman he loved was still the woman he married, or if she had been playing a game all along. That night, he waited until she went to bed, and when she did, he slipped out of their room quietly, like a shadow in the dark. He went to their safe and pulled out the prenup. He read it repeatedly, hoping it would make sense in some new way, as if the cold words would soften with his repeated readings. But no matter how often he looked, it still felt like a betrayal. A betrayal of trust. A betrayal of the love they had built. And when he finally returned to their bedroom, he couldn't sleep. He lay there, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the woman beside him, the woman he had chosen, the woman he had defended, was still the same. Or had the prenup been her way of preparing for a time when she could walk away without losing a dime? When morning came, he found her standing by the window, looking out at the city. She turned to him, and for the first time, he saw something he hadn't seen before, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. Did she know he knew? The question burned in his mind, and as she came over to him, her face softening, she kissed him on the cheek, but he couldn't feel the love he had once felt. All he could think about was the loyalty clause, and how, maybe, it was never about them. Maybe it was just about survival. Survival in a world that had taught them both the price of loyalty. And as he looked into her eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were both playing a game, but neither of them was ready to call the bluff. It was a bitter realization that sank in deep, like a stone sinking into the coldest of oceans. Sitting in the same chair where they had shared so many memories, he was now drowning in a sea of doubt and confusion. His mind spun in circles, each thought dragging him deeper into a whirlpool of uncertainty. The prenup had been his lifeline, a cold, calculated piece of paper that had given him some sense of control when the emotional storm around him felt too overwhelming. He had believed in it. He had believed it was the ultimate proof of loyalty, the one thing that could protect him from the fragile nature of love. But as the days wore on, he began to see it for what it really was: a crutch, a safety net, a shield against the fear of being hurt. And the irony was that he had been so fixated on finding proof of her loyalty, so focused on the legal terms that bound their relationship, that he had forgotten the most important thing. Love doesn't need proof. Love simply is. He had been searching for answers in all the wrong places. He had let a piece of paper dictate the value of their love, the depth of their connection, and in doing so, he had betrayed the very essence of what made them a couple. Love, he realized now, had never been about the prenup, or the loyalty clause, or the money. It was about trust. It was about the bond they had created, the moments they had shared, and the belief that they would always choose each other, no matter the circumstances. It wasn't about needing proof to feel secure. It was about feeling secure in the love itself. The revelation hit him like a bolt of lightning, and suddenly, everything came into focus. The accusations, the jealousy, the uncertainty. It was all born from the fear of not being enough. He had feared that he wasn't enough for her, that maybe, just maybe, she would find someone else. But what he had failed to see was that she had always been enough for him. She had loved him when he was at his lowest, when he had nothing but dreams in his pocket and a burning desire to prove himself. She had stayed by his side through thick and thin, long before the wealth, long before the success. And in his desperate need to protect himself, he had built walls around his heart, walls that had blocked him from fully experiencing the love that was right in front of him. He had mistaken her strength for a lack of vulnerability, and her independence for a desire to leave. And all along she had been showing him that love doesn't need to be proven. It only needs to be felt. As he sat there, the weight of it all crashed down on him. The ex, the baby bombshell, the rumors, the gossip, the prenup. All of it had clouded his vision, clouded the truth. And now, in the stillness of the moment, he saw her for who she really was, the woman he had chosen to love, the woman who had always been by his side, and the woman who would continue to be there, no matter what. The fear had been his, not hers. And in that moment of self-discovery, he realized that the one thing he had never needed was proof. He never needed the prenup. He never needed to prove her loyalty. Because what he had always needed was her heart, her trust, her love. And that was all he had ever wanted. But the hardest part of this discovery wasn't about the realization itself. It was about the truth he now had to face. He had to admit that he had let his own insecurities drive a wedge between them. He had let fear dictate his decisions, and now, standing on the edge of everything he had ever wanted, he realized that the one thing that could have saved them was something he had been looking for outside of himself all along. Love had always been right in front of him. He just had to stop looking for it in all the wrong places. As he looked at her now, sitting in the room across from him, he saw her differently. She was no longer the woman he had doubted, no longer the woman he had questioned. She was the woman he had loved all along, the woman who had never left, who had never stopped believing in him, the one person who had been by his side through everything. He stood up, his heart heavy with regret, but also with a sense of clarity he had never felt before. He crossed the room, his steps slow but deliberate. When he reached her, he knelt down before her, his eyes filled with raw emotion. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so scared of losing you that I forgot how to love you properly." She looked at him, her eyes softening, and for a moment, he saw the woman who had loved him from the very beginning, the woman who had stayed by his side, even when the world around them had crumbled. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The silence between them spoke volumes. He wasn't sure what would happen next. He wasn't sure if the trust they had built could ever be fully repaired. But what he did know was this. Love wasn't something that could be measured by legal terms or contracts. It wasn't something that could be proven by a piece of paper. Love was something you felt deep in your heart, and it was something that you had to choose every single day. And in that moment, he chose her. He chose their love. He chose to believe in the bond they had shared from the very beginning. He didn't need proof. He didn't need the prenup. He didn't need anything but her. And as he took her hand in his, he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, because love, true love, had always been enough. She walked back into the room with a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before, and as soon as her gaze met his, everything seemed to stop. The tension that had been building between them, the unsaid words, the unanswered questions, all hung in the air like an unspoken promise. His heart raced as he looked at her, the woman he had once doubted, now standing before him with a new kind of strength in her eyes. Her return wasn't just about the broken pieces of their relationship. It was about something much bigger, something that neither of them could have anticipated. He knew something had changed. He could see it in the way she carried herself now, as if she had found something within herself that had been missing before. And as she walked toward him, he wondered if this was the moment everything would finally come together. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, she cut him off with a look that was as sharp as it was unwavering. "I didn't come back to explain myself," she said, her voice steady. "I came back because I have something to tell you." The words were like a jolt of electricity through his veins, but he couldn't bring himself to interrupt. She had always been the one to push forward, to take control when things seemed out of reach, and now it was her turn to lead the way. Her eyes softened, but there was still a hint of something more powerful lurking beneath the surface. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, her words hanging in the air like a bombshell ready to explode. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to blur. He was flooded with emotions, surprise, confusion, fear. But most of all, he felt something else, something deeper. "But," she continued, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his heart beat faster, "it's not yours." The room seemed to grow colder as the weight of her words sank in. He stood frozen, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to feel. The moment was surreal, like a twisted version of reality where nothing made sense anymore. She wasn't carrying his child. The thought was like a punch to the gut, and yet somehow, it didn't hurt as much as he had expected. Instead, he felt a rush of relief. A strange, unexpected release of all the tension that had been building within him. For so long, he had carried the weight of their unresolved issues on his shoulders, the constant question of loyalty, trust, and the future of their relationship. But now, in this moment, with her standing before him and making this announcement, he realized something profound. He had been carrying the wrong burden all along. His focus had been on finding proof of her loyalty, but in doing so, he had ignored the fact that loyalty wasn't something that could be measured in blood or contracts. It was something that existed in the heart. "It's not yours," she repeated, her voice tinged with both sadness and finality. "But that doesn't change anything. I'm still here. I'm still the woman you loved. The woman you lost." He felt his breath catch in his chest as her words hit him like a tidal wave. She was telling him she hadn't come back to fix things. She was telling him that the past was behind them, and no matter the circumstances, she had moved on. It wasn't about the baby, or the man who had fathered it. It was about her, and the life she was building for herself. But even in the midst of all this chaos, he knew one thing. He had to let her go. He had to let her be the woman she was meant to be. The woman who had taught him that love wasn't about ownership, and it wasn't about control. It was about freedom. "I know it's hard to understand," she continued, her voice soft but resolute. "But the truth is, I've changed. I've learned to trust myself, to believe in myself. And that's why I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not asking for your love, but I am asking for your understanding." The silence between them stretched on, thick with the weight of everything they had been through. But as the moments passed, he realized something he had failed to see before. She was giving him the greatest gift of all, the gift of clarity. He had been living in a fog for so long, trapped in the past and consumed by guilt and doubt. But now, she had shown him the way out. She had shown him that love, true love, was not about fixing the broken pieces. It was about accepting the whole picture, the good, the bad, the painful, and the beautiful. It was about letting go of expectations and embracing the imperfect truth. "I never wanted to trap you," she said, her voice breaking just slightly, but her eyes never leaving his. "I never wanted to keep you in my life out of obligation. But I came back because I wanted you to know that I'm okay. And I want you to be okay too." It was then that the full weight of her words hit him. He had spent so much time trying to fix everything that he hadn't realized that there was nothing to fix. The brokenness, the mistakes, the pain. It had all been part of their journey, and it had led them here. She was right. He didn't need to fix her. He didn't need to fix them. He needed to accept the reality they had built together. The love they had shared, even if it was imperfect, was still real. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As he looked at her, standing tall and resolute, he finally understood. She wasn't asking for him to take her back or to fix what had been broken. She was simply asking for him to accept the truth, to accept that their time together had been meaningful, and that it had changed them both in ways they couldn't have imagined. And in that moment, he made a choice. He chose to accept the past, to let go of the hurt, and to thank her for the lessons she had taught him, about love, about letting go, and about trusting in the journey, no matter where it led. "I'm glad you're okay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm glad you found your peace." It was then that he realized something else, something he had never truly understood until now. The love he had for her was no longer the driving force in his life. It had been replaced with something even more powerful: acceptance. He had accepted the truth of their relationship. He had accepted the truth of who they both were, and in doing so, he had freed himself. And as she turned to leave, he watched her go with a sense of calm he had never known before. The chapter was over, but the story wasn't. Their journey wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the future. And in that future, he would always carry with him the lessons she had taught him. Love is not about holding on to what was. It's about letting go of what's no longer meant to be. And as he stood there, watching her walk away, he felt the weight lift from his chest. He was free. They both were. The news hit like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves through the fragile calm they had started to build. It was a quiet moment, too quiet before the storm. He had always believed in the simplicity of his emotions, the clarity of his feelings for her, and the painful history they shared. But in this moment, nothing seemed simple. Nothing seemed clear. "It's not yours," she said again, her voice trembling ever so slightly, as though she too couldn't fully believe the words that were leaving her lips. "The baby. The one I told you about. It's not yours. It's his." His heart stuttered in his chest, confusion swirling in his mind like a whirlwind. He had seen her with the child, felt the pang of jealousy that had come with it. But nothing in his wildest imaginings had prepared him for the truth she was revealing now. "What are you talking about?" His voice cracked as he searched her face for answers. The woman who had once been his everything, the one he had loved fiercely, was now standing before him with a revelation that threatened to undo everything they had built. It's his," she repeated, her eyes diverting away from his as if the truth was too painful for her to face head-on. The silence stretched between them, unbearable and thick with unspoken words. He tried to process it. He tried to understand. But the reality was too jarring, too surreal. His mind raced, 1,000 questions flooding his thoughts, each one more disorienting than the last. "His? Who's his?" he asked, though he already knew the answer, the one his heart had been trying to deny. "It's the man I told you about, the one who helped me when I was struggling." She hesitated, as though the words she was about to speak were daggers. "The one I had a relationship with, before I came back to you." The room seemed to tilt, the edges of the world blurring as everything he thought he knew about their love unraveled before his eyes. "You had a relationship with him?" His voice was low, barely a whisper, as the weight of her confession sank in. It felt like the floor had fallen away beneath him, and for the first time, he felt the crushing weight of betrayal. "It wasn't like that," she pleaded. "But the damage had already been done. I was lost. And he was there. He promised me everything I wanted. But I didn't love him. I loved you. I always loved you." Her words were desperate, her eyes pleading for understanding. But the more she spoke, the more distant he felt. She had chosen someone else. She had been in the arms of another man, another life, while he had been waiting, hoping that she would return to him. His anger flared up in a way he hadn't expected. "And now you're telling me this?" His voice was sharp, his words cutting through the air. "After everything? After I stood by you?" The betrayal burned through him like fire, and he could feel his world cracking open piece by piece. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant to deceive you." She reached out to him, but he stepped back, unable to look at her, unable to reconcile the woman he had loved with the one standing before him now. The truth had shifted everything. It had shattered the illusion of their relationship, the dream of a future they had once shared. He didn't know what to believe anymore. "So, this baby..." He couldn't finish the sentence. The words lodged in his throat, choking him as the reality of the situation hit him. "The baby's not mine. It's his. The man you called your sugar daddy?" He couldn't bring himself to say the words. They felt like poison on his tongue. She flinched at the harshness of his words, but the truth was undeniable. "I'm sorry. It was all she could say. But there was no way to undo what had been done. There was no way to erase the pain, the humiliation, the sense of betrayal that now consumed him. He had always known that there were secrets buried in the past, but he had never imagined something like this. The man who had once been a figure of power in her life had never truly left. He had always been there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment when he could come back and claim what was his. And now, with the revelation that this baby was his, the weight of the situation hit him with full force. The world around him felt like it was closing in, and he didn't know how to escape it. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice raw with emotion. "Do you expect me to just accept this? To forgive you?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. She had no words left, no justification, no defense for what she had done. She had betrayed him in a way that was impossible to ignore. "I didn't want any of this," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to be with him. But the things he promised me, the life he offered, I felt like I had no choice." He looked at her, his heart breaking. But there was a part of him, somewhere deep inside, that understood the desperation she had felt, the loneliness, the longing for something more. It wasn't an excuse for her actions, but it was the truth of her pain. And as much as it hurt, he knew he couldn't hold on to the past. He couldn't let it define him anymore. "You can't keep running back to him," he said quietly. "Not now. Not after everything we've been through." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but the damage had already been done. "I don't want him. I want you. But I understand if you can't forgive me." He stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. The baby wasn't his. She had been with another man. But none of it changed the fact that she was still standing here, asking for something he wasn't sure he could give. He had loved her. He had given her everything. And now, everything had changed. He turned away from her, his heart heavy with the burden of her betrayal. "I need to figure this out," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I need to think about everything." As he walked away, the door closing behind him, he realized that no matter how much he wanted to fix it, no matter how much he wanted to forgive her, the truth was undeniable. The past couldn't be erased. The baby wasn't his. And now, everything was different. The revelation hit him like a tidal wave. His whole life, everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and ambition, had been built on a lie. "You're what?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. The woman standing before him, the one he had once believed to be a gold digger chasing his wealth, was now telling him something that shattered every preconceived notion he had about her. "I'm richer than you now," she said, her voice steady, but there was a certain vulnerability hidden behind her words. "I never cared about your money." His mind reeled as he tried to process what she was saying. He had always believed that she had married him for his wealth, for the lavish lifestyle he had given her, for the luxurious life he had built for them. He had assumed that her desire for a life of luxury had been the driving force behind their relationship. But now, she was telling him something entirely different. Something that made him question everything. She wasn't in love with his money. She was now in a position where she was wealthier than he was. "How is that even possible?" he asked, trying to make sense of it. He had always seen her as the ambitious, materialistic woman who had been after his fortune. But now it seemed like everything he had thought about her was wrong. "I inherited my father's company," she explained, her tone calm, almost distant. "When my father passed away, he left me everything. The business, the assets, the investments. I'm worth more than you now." He couldn't believe it. The idea that she, the woman he had married, had her wealth, richer than his, was almost too much to comprehend. He had always seen her as the one who was dependent on him, on his wealth, on his status. But now, he realized how wrong he had been. She hadn't been after his money. She had never needed it. But why didn't you tell me? The question slipped out before he could stop himself, and he instantly regretted it. The truth hurt more than he expected. If she had been wealthy all along, why had she stayed with him? Why had she never said anything? I didn't need to, she said quietly, her gaze meeting his with an intensity he wasn't prepared for. I married you because I loved you. Not because of what you had. Not because of your money. The weight of her words settled over him like a suffocating cloud. He had spent so much time believing that she was with him for the wrong reasons that he had never seen her for who she truly was. But I thought... He trailed off, unsure of what to say. Everything he had believed about their relationship, about her, had been based on assumptions. He had misjudged her, misread her intentions, and now he was paying the price for it. She wasn't the woman he thought she was. And worse yet, he wasn't the man he thought he was either. I never cared about your money, she repeated, her voice softening. I wanted to build a life with you. But you never believed that. His chest tightened as her words hit him. All this time, he had been living in the shadow of his insecurities, constantly questioning her love for him, questioning her intentions. He had allowed his fears to shape his perception of their relationship. But now, the truth was undeniable. She had never been after his wealth. She had her wealth. She had never needed him for what he had, but he had needed her for what she brought to his life, her love, her companionship, her strength. So, all this time, you've been... what? Hiding it? His words were sharp, but underneath the anger, there was a sense of disbelief. He had been the one who had tried to build this empire, to accumulate wealth, to create a life of luxury. And now, here she was, surpassing him in every way. I wasn't hiding it, she said softly. I just didn't feel the need to flaunt it. I wanted to be with you for who you were, not what you had. She paused, her gaze softening as she took a step closer to him. And now, I realize how much I've hurt you by keeping this secret. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to lash out, to accuse her of betraying him in some way. But the more she spoke, the more he realized that he had been the one who had betrayed himself. He had built his life around the idea that wealth was the most important thing, that success was defined by money, and that love was something that could be bought. But now, standing in front of him, was a woman who had everything: wealth, independence, and strength. And yet she had chosen him. She had chosen a life with him, not because of what he could give her, but because of who he was. So you've been richer than me this whole time? He asked again, his voice more resigned now. It felt like an absurd question, but it was the only one he could ask. She smiled softly, but there was no pride in her smile, no sense of superiority. Yes, I am, she admitted, her eyes holding a quiet confidence. But it never mattered to me. I've never needed your money. I've always wanted you. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, he understood. He understood that she had never been after his fortune, never been driven by the things he thought were important. She had loved him for who he was, not for what he had. And now, as he stood there, processing everything she had just told him, he realized how wrong he had been. He had spent so much time worrying about what he thought she wanted, about what he thought they needed, that he had never truly seen her. I've been wrong about everything, haven't I? He asked, his voice a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer to him, her presence warm and calming. We both have, she said gently. But it's not too late. We can fix this. We can start over, with the truth this time. As her words settled in, he realized that their story wasn't over. It was just beginning. But this time, they would write it together, free from the weight of assumptions, free from the lies they had told themselves. And this time, they would do it with love, not money, at the center of it all. As the shocking truth began to unravel, the atmosphere grew heavy with betrayal and confusion. "You're telling me you were paid to break us apart?" His voice was a mixture of disbelief and fury. He had never suspected that behind the scenes, someone had been orchestrating a plan to destroy everything he had built. His ex, the woman he thought he knew so well, had not just shown up to stir drama. She had been part of something much darker. He could feel his heart pounding as the realization sunk in. It wasn't just her. It was all planned, his wife said, her voice trembling with anger. "I found out. I found the evidence." It felt like the floor was shifting beneath his feet. His world, which had already been shaken by so many twists and turns, was now spiraling into something he couldn't control. The truth hit harder than any of the lies that had come before. The ex, who had shown up pregnant and created a storm of chaos, hadn't been acting on her own volition. She had been paid by someone who wanted to destroy his marriage, his family, and his life. Why? Why would anyone do this to us? He asked, barely able to get the words out. Who would do something like this? The answer came in a whisper, but it was enough to turn his blood cold. It was my own father. His wife's voice cracked, and he watched as the weight of the revelation hit her. "Your father," he echoed, not fully comprehending what he was hearing. "My father," she confirmed, tears brimming in her eyes. "He was always worried about losing his inheritance to you. He thought that if he could destroy our marriage, he would weaken your claim to the family fortune." He could barely wrap his head around it. His father, who had been a constant presence in his life, a guiding force, someone he trusted without question, was the one behind this all along? The very man who had raised him, who had supported him through every success and failure, had played a role in trying to tear apart everything he had with his wife. It felt like a betrayal on a level he couldn't even describe. But why did he use her? Why the ex? He asked, still struggling to understand. "Because she knew you," his wife said bitterly, her voice tinged with a deep sadness. "And she knew your weaknesses. She knew how to manipulate you. And most importantly, she knew how to make you doubt me." The realization hit him like a slap in the face. His father had known everything. He had known about his insecurities, about the tensions in their relationship, and had used them as a weapon against them. All of this, it was just a game to him, his wife continued, her voice breaking. He didn't care about our love, our marriage. He only cared about keeping what was his. The coldness in her voice made him wince. His father had used his emotions, his deepest fears, against him. He had never imagined that the man he had once looked up to had been playing a cruel game all along. "I can't believe this," he whispered, feeling the weight of the betrayal sink deeper. "I trusted him." "And you weren't the only one," she said softly, her eyes filled with tears. "I trusted him too. We both did." The truth hung heavily in the air. His father, the man who had built their family's wealth and legacy, had been the puppet master pulling the strings from the shadows. The ex had been nothing more than a pawn, a means to an end. She had been paid to cause chaos, to make his wife doubt him, to make him doubt his love and commitment. And, tragically, she had succeeded. He couldn't look at his wife the same way anymore. All the pain and frustration he had directed at her, all the distance that had grown between them, had been the result of lies. His father had used every trick in the book to plant seeds of doubt and insecurity in both of them. He had turned their love into something tainted, something that felt fragile and uncertain. But now, the truth had come to light. "So, what do we do now?" he asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "We fight back," his wife said, her voice firm. "We expose him for what he's done. We take back control of our lives and our marriage." The resolve in her voice was unmistakable. He could see the fire in her eyes, the strength that had always been there, even when he couldn't see it. "We'll expose the truth. We'll show everyone that we were never the problem." She was right. The truth was the only thing that could heal the damage, the only thing that could set them free. But it would be a long, hard road ahead. His father's betrayal had changed everything. It had made him question the very foundation of his family, his legacy, and his future. But no matter how painful the journey ahead would be, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let his father tear apart everything he loved. "I'll stand by you," he said, his voice steady now. "I won't let him win." She smiled through her tears, her hand reaching for his. "Together, we'll fight this. Together, we'll make it through." The weight of the revelation didn't disappear, but the strength in their unity was undeniable. They were no longer the victims of a cruel plot. They were fighters, determined to reclaim their love, their lives, and their future. And with that resolve, they stepped into the unknown together, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that they had the power to rewrite their story. The weight of the last few weeks had crushed him. Every word from his ex, every revelation about his father's betrayal had felt like a sharp knife twisted deeper into his heart. His world had collapsed, leaving him questioning everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and family. The lies, the deceit. He didn't know if he could ever get back the trust he once had in people, in his own choices. But there was one person who never wavered, who always believed in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. It was her, his wife. Through all the chaos, the public humiliation, and the whispers behind closed doors, she had stood by him. "I didn't want to believe it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at her, the woman who had fought so hard for their love, for their marriage. "I didn't want to believe that my own father could do this to me." Her eyes softened, and she reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I know," she said gently, her voice filled with empathy. "But you're not alone in this. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself anymore." He closed his eyes, feeling the sting of the tears he had held back for so long. "I thought I could fix everything. I thought I could protect you from all of this. But I failed." She shook her head, her eyes never leaving his. "No, you didn't fail. You were hurt too. You're not the one who betrayed us. You're the one who stood up when everything fell apart." He let out a shaky breath, the guilt weighing heavy on him. "But I hurt you. I doubted you. I pushed you away when you were the one person who never stopped fighting for us." Her hand gently cupped his face, her thumb brushing away the tears that had finally begun to fall. "You didn't hurt me," she said softly. "You were hurting. You were lost. But you found your way back to me." She leaned in, pressing her forehead against his, as if trying to ground him, to remind him that they were still here, still together, still fighting. "I believed in you when I didn't know how things would turn out," she whispered. "I knew we could get through anything because I knew you. You're stronger than you think. You always have been." The rawness of her words, the depth of her belief in him, was something he hadn't realized he needed until this very moment. All this time, he had been so consumed with his own guilt and doubt that he hadn't fully seen how much she had sacrificed, how much she had endured just to stand by him. She had always believed in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. The thought of that, of how deeply she cared for him, hit him like a ton of bricks. It was overwhelming, humbling, and heart-wrenching. "I don't deserve you," he whispered hoarsely, feeling the weight of the love she had shown him. "I don't deserve someone who believes in me this much." Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no sadness in them, only pure love. "You do," she said firmly. "You do deserve me, and I deserve you. We're in this together, always. We always will be." The relief that washed over him in that moment was something he had never felt before. It wasn't just the relief of knowing that they could finally move on from the pain. It was the realization that he wasn't alone anymore. He didn't have to carry the weight of the betrayal, the anger, and the heartbreak by himself. She was with him, standing by his side, and together they could rebuild everything they had lost. "I don't know what the future holds," he said softly, his voice breaking. "But I know that with you by my side, I can face anything." She smiled, tears still in her eyes, but there was a peace there, a calmness that soothed his troubled soul. "We'll face it together," she replied, her voice steady and confident. "I'll never stop believing in you, and I'll never stop loving you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if to reassure himself that this wasn't a dream, that they were really here, together, and stronger than ever. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair, feeling the weight of his gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't even believe in myself." She pulled back slightly, just enough to look into his eyes. "Because I knew you could do it. I knew you were worth it. And I always will." In that moment, everything felt right again. The world had tried to tear them apart, but it hadn't succeeded. The lies, the betrayal, the manipulation, they were all in the past now. What mattered was this: their love, their commitment to one another, and the strength they had found in each other. "I love you," he whispered, the words carrying more weight than they ever had before. "I love you too," she replied, her smile radiating warmth and tenderness. They held each other close, the storm of the past behind them, and the future ahead full of promise. The pain was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. They had each other, and that was all they needed to rebuild what had been broken. Together, they would face whatever came next, stronger, united, and full of love. As the tension of the last few weeks finally began to dissipate, they stood there, holding each other, the weight of the past still lingering between them, but no longer suffocating them. The storm had passed, but they knew this was only the beginning of their journey together, one that would be filled with challenges, but also with healing and rebuilding. He took a step back, just enough to look at her, his gaze full of love and admiration. His heart, once heavy with doubt, now beat with a newfound certainty. "After everything that's happened, after all the lies and the hurt, I have to ask, would you still love me?" His voice was raw, vulnerable. He was opening himself up in a way he hadn't before, asking the question that had been haunting him. Was their love strong enough to withstand everything they had been through? She didn't hesitate. "I've always loved you, no matter what happened, no matter how hard it got. I never stopped loving you." Her words were simple, but they carried a depth that cut straight through the pain of the past. She reached out, cupping his face gently, her thumb tracing the contours of his jaw. "I stayed with you because I believed in us," she said softly. "Because I knew, even when things seemed impossible, that we were meant to be together. I love you, not because of your wealth or your status, but because of the person you are." He let out a deep breath, his chest tightening with emotion. He had doubted everything, even himself, and yet here she was, standing before him, offering him her heart without question. The love he had almost lost was still there, stronger, deeper, and more powerful than he ever could have imagined. "I never thought I deserved this," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I thought I'd ruined everything. But now, standing here with you, I feel like I can finally breathe again." She smiled, her eyes filled with tears that mirrored his. "You do deserve this. We both do. We deserve the chance to build something beautiful, something real." As she spoke, the world around them seemed to fade away. The drama, the betrayal, the pain. It all melted into the background, leaving only the two of them, standing together, their love stronger than ever. "So, yes," she whispered, her voice filled with conviction. "I will love you through everything. I'll always love you." The moment hung between them, a quiet pause before the future unfolded. They had faced the worst and come out on the other side stronger, their bond unbreakable. "Thank you," he murmured, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. "Thank you for never giving up on us. On me." She pulled him into her arms again, holding him close, knowing that they had made it through the hardest part. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the question that had haunted him no longer seemed as important. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about their love, their commitment, and the future they were going to build together. "I'll always choose you," she whispered, her voice full of promise. "No matter what." And in that moment, they knew that no matter what life threw their way, they would face it together, hand in hand, their love stronger than ever before. The storm was over, and a new chapter was beginning, one full of hope, forgiveness, and an unshakable belief in each other. "I love you," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I love you too," she replied, her smile lighting up her face. And as the camera pulled back, their silhouettes framed against the setting sun, the screen faded to black, leaving the audience with one final thought. Would you still love me, even after everything?